is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Chinese President Xi Jinping arrives in Portugal for a state visit after a successful tour of Latin America. Moroccan King Mohammed VI visits Gabonese President Ali Bongo, who is recovering at a military hospital in Rabat. And a new study shows some people living with HIV in South Africa could be developing resistance to antiretroviral medication. Hello and welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. Also coming up on the program, global citizen movement raises billions of dollars to fight poverty at a star-studded concert in South Africa. And in sports, Nigeria returned home victorious after winning the Africa Women's Cup of Nations. President Xi Jinping has arrived in Lisbon, the capital of Portugal, for a two-day state visit. The Chinese leader will lay a wreath at the tomb of the famed Portuguese poet Luis de Camões. He will meet with his Portuguese counterpart Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa. The two leaders will then brief the press on their talks. The Chinese president will also visit an exhibition on the Maritime Silk Road. Ahead of his arrival, President Xi said he hoped the visit will reinforce the friendship between China and Portugal. CGTN's Liu Xin sat down with the Portuguese President Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa for an exclusive interview. He has expressed his views on the future of collaboration between China and Portugal and has identified the most important potential sectors for cooperation.
Okay, talking about the future, where do you want the two countries to improve to have an even stronger cooperation? Would you want to know?
Well, let me start with schools. Universities. Why? Because that's the future, education. Our universities are cooperating, working together.
Already.
We must strengthen this relation because we're speaking of the younger generations, we're speaking of the future. Then culture. If you want to have a strong partnership, you must know each other. And to get to know each other, culture is the key point. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, social involvement. I mean, it's important that social movements, Chinese and Portuguese, cooperate. That not just universities, not just schools, but also social movements, social institutions, healthcare foundations, science foundations, technological foundations, different institutions cooperate. And then, of course, that goes together with economy.
Yeah, I'm surprised that you mentioned the economic factor.
Yes, the last, you know why? Because it's the easiest one.
Well, you say...
The easiest one, and it's much more difficult to work on education, culture, science, right, technology, society, because you look at our economy, and let me tell you, you have here the Chinese presence in the banking system, in the insurance company system, in the healthcare private system. Also in that important field of energy, in some infrastructures. That means that most of the key sectors of the economy have your presence. And that happened in less than 10 years. That's why I said it's easier to cooperate economically and financially than it is culturally, educationally and socially.
Let's now cross over to Lisbon. CGTN's Al Goodman is standing by for us with the latest on the state visit. Al, what is the significance of the visit to Portugal by Chinese President Xi Jinping?
Hi, Beatrice. Well, let me just tell you that the Chinese President Xi, has just arrived here at the Hotel Ritz, which will be his official lodging during this visit. His motorcade pulled down this street just 30 minutes ago, and he's now inside there. There are some demonstrators, pro-Chinese demonstrators, trying to welcome their president. We see them across the street and also down this way in the park. The significance, from what we're being told by Portuguese officials, is that if in the past the Portuguese-Chinese relationship was so centered on Macau, that territory of Macau, until it was turned back to China in 1999. In recent years, it's the economy, and the economy which really has been driving the relations. And so they're going to be talking business a lot on this visit. Beatrice?
So they will be talking a lot of business during the visit. What are the...
Well, Rebelo de Sousa is the president of, he's the head of state, but the power of the government is in the hands of the prime minister, which that meeting will take place tomorrow on Wednesday. So this day, it's a ceremonial visit. They'll review the troops. President Xi will lay a wreath at the tomb of the Portuguese poet Luís de Camões, and then the two presidents will talk, but probably generally about the relations between the two countries, because the president, being the head of state but not running the government, isn't making all of the decisions. And then there will be a state banquet with a lot of personalities from politics and other sectors of Portugal showing up to greet President Xi and the First Lady. So this is really the warm-up to sort of cement the relations between the two heads of state. President Xi has written about this in a newspaper article published on the weekend, that this the relationship between Portugal and China, he wrote, sort of transcends time. That's what they'll be trying to do today before they get down to the hard business on Wednesday. Beatrice?
All right, Al Goodman joining us there from Lisbon. Thank you. Now let's take a closer look at the economic relations between China and Portugal. China is Portugal's largest trading partner in Asia. The value of trade between the two countries climbed 8% year-on-year to $5 billion in the first 10 months of the year. China exported $3.1 billion worth of goods and services to Portugal, while its imports from the country grew to $1.9 billion. On the investment front, Portugal has more than 250 projects in China, with a total value of $210 million. In comparison, China's investment in Portugal has surpassed $9 billion, with most of that money going to sectors such as energy, telecoms, and finance. Meanwhile, officials at Portugal's southern deep-sea port of Sines say that the facility could play a key role in China's Belt and Road Initiative by enlarging its scope to the Atlantic Ocean. The government's plans to build a new container terminal are also attracting attention from Chinese investors. Shang Ho has more.
Port of Sines is the main maritime hub in Portugal. The town is also the birthplace of explorer Vasco da Gama, who found a direct sea route from Europe to India through the Atlantic Ocean. His discovery enabled Portugal to establish rich trade with Asian countries.
Portugal has a history which is linked to our historical movement on the 15th and 16th century. We were the first Europeans to arrive China. And now, so that means we have a maritime Silk Road, the first maritime Silk Road. And now China proposes us another way coming from China to the West, namely to Europe, to cooperate, to make trade, to work together.
After decades of development, the port of Sines has grown into an important port for cargo containers. It can receive the largest vessels in the world and operates more than 5,000 container trains per year to and from Europe.
Sines is Portugal's busiest port, handling over half of the country's total cargo volume. Now, Portugal hopes it can further promote the Europe-Asia connectivity under China's Belt and Road Initiative.
Portugal's government has signaled its willingness to develop the port as part of the 21st century maritime Silk Road. deepening the connection between Asia, Europe, Africa, and South America. It also planned to expand the railway link to Madrid, which would further strengthen its trade relationship with China.
Think about the map, geography of Portugal. It's the main entrance for Europe coming by sea, and the final way of railways coming by from China, where the land ends and the sea begins, or vice versa. Okay, so that's why you will hear a lot about Sines.
Port of Sines authorities are now seeking to add a new container terminal to handle an increase of the transshipment. The tendering process will start at the end of this year. The Portuguese government has already sent a trade mission to China to lure investors for the €600 million extension project.
We have noticed the interest of the Chinese operator to know more details of these projects, and they recognized that there is a great potential investment. In addition to the business mission, we have also received several delegations from China companies that we are willing to learn about the operation from the Port of Sines and about the new Vasta Gama terminals.
Portugal has been a seafaring nation for many centuries. Officials here hope this port will help the country reaffirm its key position on the new maritime Silk Road. Zhang He, CGTN, Sines, Portugal.
Earlier, President Xi Jinping became the first Chinese head of state to visit Panama. He is hoping to foster stronger bilateral ties with the tiny nation. Trade, tourism and technology topped the agenda, as CGTN's Rory Rettenberg reports.
Even before arriving in Panama for the first time ever, Xi Jinping, the Chinese president, said he's no stranger to the country. And though diplomatic relations were established just 18 months ago, President Juan Carlos Varela greeted Xi like a familiar friend. The two leaders oversaw the signing of a series of agreements covering everything from e-commerce to trade and tourism, banking, and student exchanges. Panama is a country of just 4 million people, but it's seen a significant increase in Chinese investment. Chinese firms are now winning more and more tenders for big projects, and most expect there's more to come. Xi Jinping said this visit will lay the groundwork for long-term bilateral cooperation. Panama was the first Latin American country to sign on to China's Belt and Road Initiative. Xi sees its canal, which he toured on Monday, as integral for Chinese shipments bound for the Caribbean and the eastern shores of the Americas. Washington first built, then occupied the canal for decades, but it's warned Panama against losing its own sovereignty over the passage to China, a suggestion Xi on Monday rebuked.
Well, this was a short visit, just one full day, but it was a long time in the making. And by all accounts, China is now officially here, and it plans to stay. Rowie Rettenberg, CGTN in Panama City, Panama.
You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. Moroccan King Mohammed VI visits Gabonese President Ali Bongo, who is recovering at a military hospital in Rabat. And a new study shows some people living with HIV in South Africa could be developing resistance to antiretroviral medication.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself. If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
The King of Morocco, Mohammed VI, has visited Gabonese President Ali Bongo at a military hospital in Morocco's capital, Rabat. The Gabonese president was flown to Morocco from Saudi Arabia, where he had been hospitalized after falling ill during an economic forum. Gabonese opposition leaders have expressed concerns over Bongo's health for about a month. The Gabonese presidency admits that Ali Bongo is seriously ill and has to undergo surgery. However, authorities insist he is on the road to recovery. Italy has surprised Egypt with an escalation in political tension by summoning the Egyptian ambassador to Rome and cutting ties with the parliament. Italy says it is concerned with the procedures of the ongoing investigations over the torture and death of Italian citizen Giulio Regeni, who died in 2016. Here's Adel Mahroui with more.
Egypt insists its investigation in the death of Italian researcher Giulio Regeni are completely transparent. Cairo says it has accepted all Rome's demands. The only exception was to include named policemen on the suspects list, which Italy requested more than once. The Egyptian side clarified that no solid evidence have been found to relate them to Regini's torture and eventually death almost 3 years ago. In response, Italy's lower house has cut ties with the Egyptian parliament.
We were surprised by the Italian Parliament Speaker's decision. We were astonished. It's an unjustified decision and unfortunate. We have 8 Egyptian citizens who faced crimes that sometimes are worse than Regini's. They are issues of great concern to us, but it won't lead us to break ties. We told the Italians we must differentiate between Regini's case and the nature of our bilateral relations.
Egyptian politicians believe that the Italian parliament's decision won't greatly impact bilateral relations.
Egypt and Italy are countries that cannot afford to cut ties. Both of them have huge common interests, whether it's economic or regional crisis. Egypt and Italy have integral roles in Libya and in battling illegal migration. I believe that the Italian Parliament Speaker's decision won't have great effect. It won't affect the bilateral relations.
Giulio Regini disappeared on January 25, 2016, when Egypt was marking the 5th anniversary of its popular uprising that forced longtime ruler Hosni Mubarak to resign. Days later, Regini's body was found ditched near a highway. International criticism has surrounded Egypt over Regini's death. Because of that crisis, some officials say the country has been abused for political gains. It's why many here insist that Cairo's benefit is to find the perpetrators and put a final end to this controversial case. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
Meanwhile, Egypt has hosted its first arms fair. President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi inaugurated the event in Cairo. 40 countries are taking part. Companies are presenting items such as Pakistani gold-plated firearms and French fighter jets. 400 companies are exhibiting their goods. Egyptian weapons are also on display. Military officials as well as other authorities have taken part in the event.
This exhibition shows the country's power. As you know, the countries that organize defense shows are the developed countries. We are displaying the Egyptian products associated with military production so that they find their spot on the world market.
Let's go to Tunisia now, where ministers have approved a bill providing for gender equality when it comes to inheritance. Women's rights activists have supported the draft legislation, which will be discussed in Parliament this month.
A cabinet meeting chaired by President of the Republic, Beji Qaid Sibsi, approved a draft organic law supplementing the Personal Status Code. Qaid Sibsi proposed on August 13, 2017, inheritance equality for women and announced the creation of the Committee on Individual Freedoms and Equality, COLIB.
According to the Constitution, Tunisia is a civil state based on 3 principles: citizenship, the people's will, and finally, the supremacy of the law. Article 21 of the Constitution imposes equality between men and women.
The COLIB released a report on June 12, 2018, which includes a set of proposals to revamp the Personal Status Code, particularly in connection to equal inheritance rights and the consolidation of individual liberties. COLIB is chaired by Bushra Belhaj Ahmida, a lawyer and a member of the Tunisian parliament, who's accepted public and off
The report unleashed controversy from conservative currents who reject any reform. We respect Islam, but anything is subject to interpretation. Religion should not be mixed with politics. Women are victims of injustice. Equal inheritance is a constitutional right.
This daily show at a local radio station, EFM in Tunisia, features 5 of the most talented women in the North African state. Naima is a journalist and a women's rights activist. She signed a petition to support the Equal Inheritance Law.
My dad and his sister opted for equal inheritance without any family conflict. Tunisian women are avant-gardists. Tunisia continues its path-breaking role in the Arab-Muslim world. I'm for 100% equality between men and women. We have the same economic and social rights.
Following the release of the Colib report, a wave of protests hit Tunisia. The parliament is still divided on whether equal inheritance bill should be adopted at a plenary session. A few months ago, hundreds of women took to the streets in the Tunisian capital to demand equal inheritance rights, a subject often seen as taboo in the Arab and Muslim world. Tunisia grants women more rights than other countries in the region. Alban Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
A survey released in Johannesburg has revealed that a number of people living with HIV in South Africa are developing resistance to antiretrovirals as a result of defaulting. This means patients do not take their medication regularly and on time. The survey was conducted by the Human Science Research Council with the assistance of UNAIDS. CGTN's Lisan Jamela has more.
Introduced by the United Nations 1990 hopes that by 2020, 90% of people living with HIV will be diagnosed. 90% of them will be on antiretroviral. And 90% of those living with this disease will have their viral load suppressed. This survey by the Human Sciences Research Council is one of the largest national household HIV and AIDS and health surveys in the country. The study has become an internationally recognized and respected source of information on HIV and AIDS here in South Africa. The methodology used for the survey was random sampling approach. The council also used anonymous HIV testing with informed consent.
This has been a groundbreaking approach which in a way enables us to track the epidemic at a much more macro level. These surveys have been central to the approach of knowing your epidemic and knowing your response. And this has been important because this approach is central to government's approach, is central to the National AIDS Council approach in South Africa, which they continue to champion.
The research revealed that many people who are living with HIV tend to default. In other words, they're not consistently taking their medication as per requirement.
Clearly, there is a need to support adherence to reduce defaulting from ART because those people are no longer in care. 3/4 of them had drug-resistant mutations. There is also a need to strengthen the first-line regimens, maybe by introducing the integrase strand transferase inhibitors that have got a higher threshold for resistance as part of the first-line treatment, and I think there are moves to do that in South Africa, which is very encouraging.
Moyo says there's a need to look at all various levels of antiretroviral treatment programs.
These findings really are consistent with what was found in the World Health Organization HIV drug resistance report, where they found that resistance to first-line treatment ranged between 50 to 90%. So we need to look at all the various levels of the antiretroviral treatment program. So keeping people on treatment, adherence, all those things around strengthening the broader program are very important. And I think that's a policy implication for South Africa, especially with the large numbers of people that are in treatment.
South Africa's health department says this situation is quite concerning.
We do have a challenge of defaulters. We've got about 25% or so of HIV patients who are defaulting. Because we've been told that patients, they don't want to come to facilities because of the queues. As a department, we have a program that is called CCMDD, which is the Chronic Central Medication Dispensing at facilities, not facilities, in the private sector or in the communities where patients can access the ARVs for that.
South Africa has the largest HIV pandemic in the world. The country also has the largest antiretroviral program. Yulisa Njamela for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
South Sudan's government says it is containing the yellow fever outbreak in the western part of the country near the border with the Democratic Republic of Congo. Juba says no deaths have been reported as yet. South Sudan declared the outbreak last week. CGTN's Patrick Oyet speaks to the Health Ministry about the outbreak.
According to the World Health Organization regulations, any single case of yellow fever or of any hemorrhagic fever is considered as an outbreak. So what we have now is an outbreak of a yellow fever.
So what else has the government done to try to contain the situation?
Yeah, what we have done is we have reactivated our yellow fever response team. Already in place we have infrastructure for Ebola, which is more or less the same as what you need for yellow fever. So it was easy to reactivate our yellow fever team, working together alongside with the Ebola team at the border. There's already a screening center which can pick up any yellow fever, not necessarily Ebola alone. So what we have done is those who were in contact with him have been identified and they are being monitored. And we have also advised the people living in the village not to travel outside the village unless it is absolutely necessary and must be known that they are traveling and to where they are going. That must be known to us. We have gone out also to inform the public and educate them on the importance of reporting any suspicious fever, or if there is persistent fever and malaria has been excluded, then it should be reported immediately. We are advising our people that you should not panic. We are not banning travel between us and the Congo or to any other country, but we are telling them when you are traveling, you must ensure that you have been vaccinated and carry your yellow fever card. Business should go on as usual. Those who are trading with South Sudan should not be scared. It is absolutely under control and there's no fear whatsoever. Individuals wanting to visit their relatives in or outside South Sudan are also encouraged to do so. Those who are coming in, make sure that you have your vaccination history up to date, that you have your yellow fever card as a confirmation of your vaccination. If you haven't been vaccinated, or if you can't remember that you have been vaccinated recently and you don't have, or within the last 10 years, or you don't have your yellow fever card, you can take another vaccination. It doesn't harm. Those who are traveling, make sure that you have been vaccinated, say that you don't also pose a risk to others.
Still on health matters, Tunisia has welcomed the support from the United Nations and civil society to fight AIDS, tuberculosis and malaria. The North African state has hosted a regional summit aimed at developing healthcare partnerships.
The Middle East and North Africa International Symposium on AIDS, tuberculosis and malaria was held in the capital city Tunis. The Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis and malaria has allocated to Tunisia a new grant worth $5 million for the period 2019-2021.
Tunisia has received 3 grants from the fund during the period from 2007 to 2018. We welcome the support provided by the United Nations programs and civil society for national efforts to control diseases.
Experts consider it essential to support countries affected by these diseases. They noted that many governments have challenges in dealing with these epidemics. Therefore, the Global Fund established since 2002 a coordination and partnership mechanism between the public-private sectors in several member states.
We have been able to actually save lives that has been in danger. So in this region also, the rising political commitment from the ministries, from the public sector and also the private sector, and even the people who are living with HIV and other diseases are rising up and standing up to fight these diseases.
The Ministry of Health in Tunisia emphasized the importance of the subsidies allocated to fight HIV/AIDS, malaria and tuberculosis, particularly among the groups most exposed to these diseases.
It is essential to effectively adhere to the global strategy to fight against AIDS, tuberculosis and malaria, to make good use of the subsidies allocated for this purpose, and to think about new financing mechanisms to continue fighting these dangerous diseases.
Tunisian and foreign participants to the Middle East and North Africa International Symposium on AIDS, tuberculosis and malaria say the support to many countries is focused on advocacy, preventive screening, improving basic health services, and expanding outreach. The Global Fund to fight AIDS, tuberculosis and malaria was established in 2002 to mobilize funding and resources. So far, it has provided financing to 140 countries. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
A year ago, a Sierra Leonean diamond was sold in New York for $6.5 million. Residents of the Koriadu community where it was found were promised their cut of the sale would be used to develop the village. But frustration is now growing as the government has yet to take any action.
When Pastor Emmanuel Momo and a group of miners unearthed a 709-carat diamond, they were filled with excitement. The gem was auctioned off in New York for $6.5 million. 60% of the sale was sent to the Sierra Leonean government. $3.8 million was earmarked for infrastructure projects in the small village of Koriadu. But a year on, residents say authorities have yet to implement any of the promised programs.
The money that the government have for the Koriadu village is not like is a money donated by the government or from an NGO. This is a bona fide property of the Koriadu village.
The pastor has used his own share of the sale to help support villagers. The Rappaport Group, which managed the auction, has also stepped in, providing 50 solar panels. But the construction of a school for the village has ground to a halt as a government contract is being reviewed.
If this project is not going through, or if this project never go through, I'm not sure. If anybody with this community will take a big diamond like a football, we march to the government. We will never march to the government.
By selling the diamond through legal means, Pastor Emmanuel had hoped to show there is an alternative to the black market. The government has called for patience and has promised that the funds will be spent carefully. Asatal, CGTN.
And your business news now coming up next. Here's what's ahead. Russia and Saudi Arabia reach a deal to balance oil production in 2019. And Egypt posts the first budget surplus in 15 years.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Russia and Saudi Arabia have agreed to extend their cooperation to balance the oil market into 2019. This has paved way for a deal at the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries meeting this week in Vienna, Austria. The OPEC Advisory Committee recommended a cut of 1.3 million barrels a day last week, but the group received an unexpected cut of 325,000 barrels a day from Canada. Steady production and record oil output has helped Saudi Arabia offset losses after U.S. sanctions on Iran. The respective shares of supply are based on the October output, as the International Monetary Fund estimated the price each member of the bloc needs to balance its 2018 budget. Egypt has achieved a budget surplus for the first time in 15 years. Finance Minister Mohamed Might reported a surplus of $112 million in the fiscal year 2017-2018 to the Cabinet. The government has been targeting a 2% surplus for the fiscal year. The Finance Minister is now planning to issue foreign currency bonds in the first quarter of 2019. Last month, the Finance Minister said they will not be seeking further funding from the IMF. The lender has advanced Egypt $12 billion in a program that expires next year. Under the program, the government is implementing reforms aimed at cutting subsidies and public service expenditure. Egypt is also planning to sell state companies whose shares will be offered on the stock exchange. The Tunisian dairy industry could grind to a halt. Farmers, distribution centers and dairy companies have accused the government of imposing low prices on their goods while production costs have skyrocketed. CGTN's Adnan Chauchi has the details.
The Tunisian Chamber of Dairy Industries has warned that dairy professionals will stop all activities in all regions across the North African state if the government does not restart negotiations by the end of the current year.
The government is called upon to take urgent decisions in order to revive the sector and to avoid blocking of activities in the whole chain, collection, production and marketing. If no measures are taken, dairy activities will be interrupted in 4 weeks.
Officials at the Tunisian Union of Agriculture and Fisheries, UTAP, forwarded their requests to the Premier's office to begin negotiations. They claimed that they received no response. Professionals recommended a 20% hike in the price of milk for the entire industry.
The dairy sector is now in crisis because of the decline in production, not the monopolies announced by the government, and the situation is likely to worsen further, particularly with the successive increases in fodder prices. In return, the government has chosen the importation of milk, which is the easiest solution.
Consumers have complained about the unavailability of dairy products at supermarkets. Finding something as basic as a bottle of milk is a real challenge. Tunisians say they have been caught up in a conflict between the Ministry of Trade, the Ministry of Agriculture and syndicates.
Honestly, we do not care about who's responsible. As consumers, we just want milk and dairy products to be available in the market at any time and at a reasonable price.
This year, and for the first time, Tunisia has seen a drop in milk production, a 7% decline in production at the collection level, whereas production has been usually on an upward trend between 5% and 7% annually. Adnan Chauchi, CGTN, Tunis.
The stock of unpaid loans being held by commercial banks in Kenya has grown by $66 million in 9 months up to September of this year. This has been brought about by a challenging business environment that has seen many small businesses and households default. The latest banking sector data shows loans rose to $326 million from $260 million in a similar period last year. The rise of non-performing loans is against state data that indicates that the economy grew by 6% in the first half of the year. The statistics now confirm observations by economists that heavy public spending on infrastructure is driving the growth. Kenyan banks have since responded to the rise in the risk profile of borrowers by diverting money to government securities. British Prime Minister Theresa May is expected to urge Parliament to back her Brexit deal later on Tuesday. A vote on the agreement next week could determine May's political fate and whether Britain leaves the European Union without a deal. May's plan to maintain close ties with the European Union after Brexit has long been criticised. This has created challenges in her efforts to secure Parliament's approval. Britain will leave the European Union under terms negotiated with Brussels if the Prime Minister wins the vote. It would be Britain's biggest shift in trade and foreign policy in more than 40 years. The trade war between the world's two biggest economies has hit the American soybean sector hard. But news of China's possible plan to buy more U.S. agricultural products has given bean prices a boost. American farmers are viewing the truce agreed upon by President Donald Trump and President Xi Jinping as a positive step forward. CGTN's Dan Williams has more.
After a brutal year for US farmers, finally a sign of hope.
The Illinois Farm Bureau's annual meeting brought together farmers from across the state. The main topic of discussion, the trade truce agreed between US President Donald Trump and China's President Xi Jinping. As part of that truce, the White House announced China would immediately resume buying some American agricultural products. Beijing hasn't confirmed that detail, so there remains some confusion as to the precise agreement. But what is clear that the US is delaying additional tariffs on Chinese imports for 90 days, as the two sides ramp up efforts at negotiation. US Secretary of Agriculture Sonny Perdue is optimistic about the future direction.
As you know, the 90-day cooling off period where we won't go to 25% tariffs on those additional $200 billion is a great opportunity for us to get serious to make the decisions that will benefit both countries. We would love to restore the trade. Our farmers have borne the brunt of the retaliatory tariffs, and I'd love to see them removed.
Illinois is the leading producer of soybeans in the US. Over the last few months, the price of soybeans has fallen below the cost of production.
For farmers here, news of the truce is being seen as an important positive step. But given the developments over the last year, few here are getting carried away with the announcement just yet.
It's a beginning step, and that's the most important aspect. It's a start. And that's not just President Trump, but both presidents have agreed that they're going to have a discussion, of which we haven't had for a long time. It's just a beginning point.
While other farmers remain concerned about the potential long-term damage in trade relations.
They've stepped up and understand the position they've put us in and have been doing a lot to try and get over the hump and get this done before it does any long-term damage to our trade relations. Just with China, but the rest of the world, because once we're looked at as an unreliable source, then other countries pick up on that and go, well, if they'll do that to China, maybe we can't count on them.
It has been a tough year for US agriculture and for soybean farmers in particular. But many here hope this development will finally bring some much needed relief. Dan Williams, CGTN, Chicago.
And stay with us for more on the program. Here's what's ahead. The global citizen movement raises billions of dollars to fight poverty and inequality during a star-studded concert in South Africa.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Panama, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has called for an end to poverty. He was speaking at the Global Citizen Mandela Centenary Festival this weekend. The Global Citizen Movement has raised billions of dollars to fight poverty and inequality. This year's campaign has taken place in South Africa to coincide with the centenary of former President Nelson Mandela. Ramaphosa has joined world leaders and international artists in honoring the legacy of a freedom fighter who would have turned 100 this year. CGTN's Julie Shire was at the star-studded concert in Johannesburg.
Pledges and tributes poured in from world leaders and businesses at the Mandela 100 Global Citizen Concert held in Johannesburg, raising more than $7.5 billion to help end poverty.
Do you think that we can actually solve these problems until 2030? It's around the corner.
Yeah, I really do, but it's going to take more systems and governments stepping up and using the power that they have to make that happen. But because Global Citizens is so powerful and such a huge voice and so many young people are involved, they're the future, so I absolutely think we can.
The festival was held in honor of Nelson Mandela's 100th birthday celebrations. The Joburg crowd was treated to a stellar lineup of local and international artists and personalities brought together by Global Citizen co-founder Hugh Evans.
I first met Hugh Evans years ago, sitting in Hugh Jackman's living room. We were sitting around in a circle, and he was talking about his dream of ending poverty by 2030. And I thought, who is this kid? Because at the time he looked like he was 12. Well, he still looks like a kid, but he's certainly doing a big, important thing. And to be here to honor Madiba's 100th birthday, how could you not say yes when he asked you, would you like to participate?
Nelson Mandela's legacy is the reason we're here right now. You know, not just Nelson Mandela, but the other struggle leaders, everyone who fought to make this country what it is. I think the legacy of Nelson Mandela is the Rainbow Nation. The legacy of Nelson Mandela is the idea of forgiveness, but at the same time, accountability, the idea of progress, and I think most importantly, hope.
The money raised will go towards helping more than 130 million people from poor and impoverished communities in developing countries. Judy Shara, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
In Tanzania, the Swahili Fashion Week has been held in Dar es Salaam. Designers, investors, models and fans flocked to the National Museum to see East African haute couture on show. CGTN's Daniel Kijo has more.
The runway, amazing designs and awards are just some of the ingredients that tailor-make one of East Africa's biggest fashion events. Internationally known and one of this year's award winners, Martin Kadinda, says this is more than just a show.
So it's a way of being diplomatic, to connect African people to one stage and showcase our creativity.
For over a decade, the show emphasizes to the region that fashion is an income-generating creative industry, meanwhile promoting a Made in Africa concept. This is the 11th annual Swahili Fashion Week, and each year there's a central area of focus. Then this time round, the theme is the Swahili language and its promotion. With over 40 designers present this year, it acts as a platform for up-and-coming designers in the region. Designers like Bijou Trends and others aim to push East African products into African diaspora markets.
She has tried to incorporate some Swahili and our national, our tourism attractions like Serengeti. So I can see she has tried to accommodate the culture, the Swahili language within her outfits.
Created by celebrated Pan-African couture from Tanzania, Mustafa Sanali in the year 2008, the longevity of the show is not absent of challenges.
What different can we do, number one? Number two, how do we involve more support from development partners, government and the corporate,
For now, organizers and designers regroup and go back to the drawing board till next year. Their goal is the same, to make Swahili Fashion Week the most sought after and preferred fashion platform in Africa for the international market. Daniel Kijo, CGTN, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania.
And in Kenya, a beauty pageant has raised awareness about the needs of people living with albinism. It's also aimed at boosting the confidence of the contestants.
For participants strutting down the runway, this wasn't just a pageant. It was a safe space to celebrate their albinism. Those living with albinism in Africa often face both prejudice and violence.
This region has lost over 200 people with albinism as a result of the killings. So I really thought that then maybe people need to understand who we are, to see the true colors of ourselves, and also really to ensure that persons with albinism also have an equal opportunity.
The Albinism Society of Kenya recently organized this event with the help of partners from Uganda and Tanzania. 30 competitors walked it out for the top spots. While not everyone can be the king or queen, the pageant offered them an uplifting atmosphere.
People don't understand what albinism actually is, and they don't know how to treat it. So a lot of ignorance comes through it. A person will just come to me and be like, just start touching me, like pulling my skin and pinching me.
The winners of Miss and Mr. Albinism receive a cash prize and will act as ambassadors for the organization. Astatal, CGTN.
And your sports news coming up next. Here's what's ahead. Nigeria returned home victorious after winning the Africa Women's Cup of Nations.
Africa, where champions are made, records are broken, legends are born. We're there for every goal, for every knockout, for every step of the way. Match Point, only on CGTN.
And we begin with women's football. Nigeria have been crowned champions of Africa for a 9th time. The Super Falcons sealed their victory over the weekend after a 4-3 penalty shootout over South Africa. And make no mistake, victory did not come easy for the Super Falcons, as CGTN's Deji Badmus tells us.
Arriving back in Nigeria with the trophy after the hard-fought final victory over arch-rival South Africa. The reception for the Super Falcons was obviously low-key, with just few government officials on hand to receive the team at the airport in Abuja. The fans were nowhere to be found, but that still did not take away from what this team has managed to accomplish.
The tournament was a very tough one. It wasn't easy as it used to be like 6 years ago. Now you have to really fight to win the match. And we went there determined, we trained, and you can see the result. We came home successfully. So.
Indeed, the road to the final was not easy. The team began with a 1-0 defeat to South Africa, but bounced back with convincing wins over Equatorial Guinea and Zambia. The semi-final against Cameroon was testing. The indomitable Lionesses dragged out a 0-0 stalemate beyond 120 minutes, forcing the Nigerians to rely on penalties to scale through to the final. The same situation played out in the final, with the Falcons missing several glit-edged opportunities, including an Asisat Oshoala penalty, for emerging victorious on penalties.
I'm personally happy, and I'm sure many Nigerians too are also happy. We are also looking forward to even a better performance of that team when they go to the global stage. I'm happy for the fact that again we have reasserted our supremacy, not just over South Africa, but also over the whole of Africa, that we are the undisputed champions when it comes to women football in this continent.
The Super Falcons now head to the World Cup again as African champions, but not without worries. The team did not gel very much at the Alcon, with several of the players misfiring during the tournament. Striker and African Women Player of the Year Oshoala only truly shone in one match, a hat-trick in a 6-0 win over Equatorial Guinea. Her 3 goals in that match account for her total in the tournament. Her strike partner Desire Okpara-Nozie did not fare much better. She scored only 2 goals in the 4-0 victory over Zambia. No Nigerian was given an individual award, while only goalkeeper Tochukwu Oluehi and defender Onome Ebi made the team of the tournament. Oshoala had to make do with just a place among the substitutes.
Everything is really getting better now. We see a lot of good players, good teams, great fights among the teams. Everyone wants to go to the World Cup. So I think it's really getting better in Africa now. You see a lot of Africa countries are already catching up. You don't see teams losing like 6-7-0 any longer.
If you come to defense, we play perfect, but we need to also improve the attacking play a little. So that's what we need to work on before the World Cup.
The Super Falcons have not been able to translate their dominance on the continent to the world stage. The best outing in the Women's World Cup so far was in 1999 in the United States, when the team made it to the quarterfinal and crashed out to Brazil.
This time around, you are playing against countries that look even stronger than you. So this time around, our preparation has to be raised. We don't wait till the month leading to the championship itself before we start remembering that, oh, we need to play. To play some friendly matches.
It's still about 7 months before the World Cup kicks off in France, and the football lovers across the continent would be hoping that Africa's representatives of the tournament would not be going there to make up the numbers, which appears to have been the case for over 10 years now. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Meanwhile, Nigeria's opponents, South Africa, have had a remarkable year. Apart from finishing runners-up to Nigeria this weekend, they've defended their COSAFA Cup title and secured qualification to the World Cup. The coach and team are also up for prestigious CAF awards. CGTN CS Duplessis reports.
Supporters of the South African national team gathered in their numbers to welcome back the side and celebrate Banyana Banyana's first ever qualification for the World Cup. The tournament's top goal scorer and CAF Player of the Year nominee, Thembi Kgatlana, says it was overwhelming to see the support for the team after their second-place finish in Ghana.
It was very heartwarming to see everyone leaving whatever duties they have to welcome the team. I mean, since I've been playing for Banyana, I've never ever seen this. It's always about boys, but today it was all about Banyana.
The Banyana Banyana skipper, Janine van Wyk, who is also nominated for the Player of the Year award, says she was blown away by the reception and believes qualifying for the World Cup is the highlight of her career.
This is probably my top rank achievement I've ever achieved. Out of participating in the Olympic Games, being in several AFCON competitions, beating Nigeria, this is ranked the best.
Coach Desiree Ellis, who departs later this week for the World Cup draw, says she is extremely proud of her team and their efforts at the tournament.
We're just disappointed that we couldn't bring the cup home, but we got there, done what we were supposed to do, and that was qualify for the World Cup. I said right at the beginning it's not negotiable, and we kept using that word, but we said we needed to be phenomenal, and we were.
Despite finishing as runners-up for the 5th time at the Africa Cup of Nations, it's mission accomplished for Team South Africa. They've qualified for the World Cup, it's job done, and the heroes' welcome they've received here at OR Tambo International speaks volume for what they have done for women's football in the country. They'll enjoy some time off before shifting their focus to the global showpiece in France next year. CS Duplessis, CGTN, Johannesburg.
Real Madrid's Croatian midfielder Luka Modric was named winner of the 2018 Ballon d'Or on Monday, breaking Cristiano Ronaldo's and Lionel Messi's decade-long hold on the prestigious award. Modric helped Real Madrid win a third successive